The views, opinions, and content provided by our host and guests are just that, opinions and views that are not intended to malign any group, religion, business, individual, or thing. That said, please know that many of the stories shared and topics we discuss on this podcast contain disturbing or emotional content, which may be triggering. As I mentioned on my social media accounts, I basically come with a triggering content warning, but with lots of love and compassion. This podcast is conducted in a long-form interview style with the hope of capturing some of the deeper considerations and details around survivors' stories. We also hope to help those on the outside who are caring about survivors in a group of high demand, high control, by sharing their perspective and struggles, and also expert voices intended to help us unpack some of the complicated considerations around topics related to cults. Welcome to Season 2 of the Project Hope podcast. I am your host, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am a cult survivor myself. I got out of this group in 2012, and for anyone interested, you can hear the story of how I got in and how I got out in Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. I now work with survivors of coercive control. I am not a psychotherapist. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control and have been trained specifically in areas of expertise that will support survivors of coercive control. You're welcome to check out my credentials and offerings at jennifer-french.com. And I'm going to take a moment here to define this term coercive control, as one of my heart's desires is to help society at large better understand coercive control in cases that are not just culty, but across the globe. I view coercive control as a societal issue, a human rights issue. It's at the heart of cases where women and girls are murdered. We find coercive control in one-to-one relationships that are intimate, in gangs, sex trafficking, and cults of all types. Coercive control is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. The victim's everyday existence is micromanaged, and their space for action, as well as potential as a human being, is limited and controlled by the abuser. Initially, the victim may be drawn into the relationship with love bombing and charm. Gaslighting, isolation, economic control, and financial abuse can take place alongside rules and regulations that are gradually introduced over time and change at the whim of the abuser. The victim knows there are consequences if rules are broken, and they apply to the victim rather than the perpetrator, creating a double standard. Over time, coercively controlling behavior erodes the victim's sense of self, their confidence, self-esteem, agency, and autonomy. The abuser creates an unreal world of contradiction, confusion, and fear. It is helpful to know that 51% of victims do not even know that they are being abused, manipulated, and controlled. Coercive control correlates significantly to serious harm, and in cases of intimate partner violence, it precedes homicide. These can be difficult topics to grapple with, so I truly hope that this podcast helps to protect you and those you love with helpful voices and information. If you appreciate the podcast, please let us know, subscribe and comment with kindness. Think critically, trust your gut, and be free. In 2004, Ryan Hernandez joined a Catholic religious community to live a life of prayer, education, and charity. He was just 17 years old at the time he left his life in Los Angeles to follow, quote, the call, and to follow Christ. Many years later, he would refer to this Catholic sect as an end times cult. While in the group, he had been a devoted follower and loyal member, but there was also abuse and brainwashing taking place, and it was this abuse and growing shame that became an unbearable burden for him to bear. After years of bullying, physical abuse, humiliations, psychological abuse, and even solitary confinement, Ryan made the decision to leave the community. Outside of the cult, Ryan found that his mind was still under their influence and negativity. After years of being brainwashed that life outside of the community would mean being cursed by God, Ryan found himself in a deep depression, loneliness, and shame. With the help of some true friends and a supportive family, Ryan was able to find the healing that he needed and to free himself from the cultic influences that had entrapped him. Ryan is now working to bring awareness to cult abuse and other important issues through his project called The Truth That Heals podcast. It is available on major podcast platforms as well as on YouTube, and you can find the link in our show notes. This is a 3-part interview as Ryan so generously shares his story with us. I know you will be very moved by what he experienced and how he left. As many of you know, the distress and upheaval that often comes with leaving can be disorienting on many levels. In particular, I love that in Ryan's story, we have a beautiful example of the natural ways that our systems heal by taking our power back. So this is perhaps a story that offers hope and inspiration, despite all that Ryan endured. Thank you all for listening. This is part 1 of our 3-part interview with Ryan Hernandez. So welcome, Ryan Hernandez, to the Project Hope podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It is an honor to be here.
Great. Well, let's begin, Ryan, by just getting a little bit of an understanding of kind of the family unit that you were born into.
Okay, so my parents, they moved to Los Angeles from El Salvador. They came, they got their papers, did everything legally. And even then, it was very difficult being from a Spanish-speaking country and then coming to America. But they did that sacrifice, and I'm very grateful to them for sticking it out through thick and thin. So that's a bit about my parents. Then they have their own struggles, learning the language, getting used to a diversity of different cultures. Whereas in El Salvador, you're really around just Salvadorians or Central Americans. So here was this a different atmosphere for them, you can say, going to LA. So my first brother was born in South Central, I believe, or somewhere downtown. Second brother was born in Hollywood, and then I was born in Bellflower. That's closer to like the Long Beach area. So we're all California kids, but that's the foundation is we come from that Salvadorian background, but we grew up in LA. And me personally, I grew up more in Bellflower and Norwalk. But something that my parents brought with them was not just the culture, but also the faith. So we grew up very Catholic, going to church. I went to a Catholic school, and there was nothing, from my experience, abusive or like religious abuse or like religious like it wasn't drilled to us that we had to be perfect. It was more, it's part of our faith, and it was more free. We can pray when we wanted, and it was very. I found it to be at times. At times there was strictness, but I found most from my parents there was this loving faith relationship. So the way I viewed faith as a child and going to Catholic school was more. It was a happy time, not forced, but very peaceful, very loving. But then Now, this is starting to get a little bit into the timeline with the cult that I was involved in. The founder, his name is Father Bing. He comes from the Philippines, and he established this religious movement, which it appears to be Catholic. They go by the name Catholic, but once you're in, you'll start seeing the red flags little by little that it is a cult. But of course, you don't want to see it. So he started going to LA, and our family would go to to some of the retreats around 1994. And I was only about 7 years old, so of course I'm very young.
Yeah.
But in 2004, 10 years later, so this priest, he goes to LA like once every now and he'll give retreats. And in those retreats, he'll talk about faith and prayer, which is cool. If anyone wants to practice their faith, no problem. But then he'll make this, his preaching started getting more radical, where it's the end is coming, everyone is a Freemason, the banks are going to get destroyed, and your money is not going to be worth anything. So you need to stick to his group. So eventually, he got kicked out of LA with the movement, the missionaries who are with him. But so my family, we're kind of thinking like, there's something, because the way he presents it is that he's the only priest or preacher speaking the truth in the Catholic Church. So the rest of the priests and everybody else, whether it's the government or even in the church, either they are demonically possessed or they are agents of Satan. So hearing that, I felt that my family was very like confused, but we bought it because he's saying how the rest of everybody else, every church, every other group, they are contaminated by demonic infestation. So that would really get us more hooked.
Interesting. For clarification, he's an ordained Catholic priest.
Yes.
And so he's in LA, really hosting retreats. So he doesn't have his own kind of congregation. And when that happens, Ryan, is it at the retreats, or do you think it's in front of a congregation, or at the retreats that he begins to preach this more radicalized message?
Well, from what I remember, he started off preaching like a lot about wars, about what's going on, and he'll use that like for example, current events,
Yes.
tragedies, and he'll use that as proof that things are in disarray and that he has the only mess, or he has like the fullness of the gospel, or he has this, he called it the gift of the Holy Spirit. And so it gets the people who are listening, who are not really, we're not members, we're just attending these retreats, but it gets us thinking a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So he is ordained, but in the Catholic Church, even though you're ordained, you can't just go wherever you want. There are things called like jurisdictions or a diocese. So what happened was he started to recruit members. One of them was even my brother. He joined. He joined for a little bit because the way it presents itself is that we're just missionaries. We're just here to pray, and we pray with people. So it's
Yes.
like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just praying with people. That seems very innocent and very for me it sounded very exciting, where you can travel and pray with people. So it was different, but what happened was some of the parents of members who were recruited complained to the Diocese of Los Angeles. And from what I'm aware of, this is around the year 2000. They were complaining that this movement is becoming a cult. And so those parents, I remember, were kind of like, from the rest of the community, those who would go to the retreats, the rest of us were upset with these parents, because the idea is your sons have joined this movement. Your sons have left their life to follow, not Father Bing, but they would say they left to follow God.
Yeah.
It seems like a divine mission. So what happened was the Diocese of Los Angeles ended up kicking out this community, not this community, because they weren't established there, but they were no longer welcomed. So what Father Bing would do to get around that was, instead of going to churches, he would go to hotels and in private, and we would go to these hotels and attend his retreats. And during these hotel retreats, he would say about how, oh, we're not allowed by the bishop in this area, see the persecution. So that's really, I believe I saw like the rise of this cult ideology. It wasn't birthed right away, but it really started formulating during the 90s to the 2000s.
Yeah, the kind of transmutation of it into the extremism, but also into this kind of magical thinking and us them at the same time, that dynamic where you're becoming more and more entrapped in that belief system and unable to kind of access uh, healthy relationships outside of it, right?
Well, the way it was presented at first sounded very healthy, and I think that's why the church was very open to it. Because here's Father Bing, he creates this new missionary branch in the church, and what they do is they pray with Catholics. We're not going to go out and look for random strangers. So the way they function is by catering to the Catholics. So it sounds healthy where, okay, like let's say I'm the bishop of LA, and people are no longer praying, people are no longer going to church. Okay, here's Father Bing. Their mission is to help people come back to church, or Catholics come back to church, have a better understanding. Sounds pretty healthy. It's like it's going to be healthy for the church. But then here comes Father Bing saying that everyone else is bad. And so that's really what I think caused the parents of these recruits to go out to the church and say, hey, I think they're a cult. So they did get um not disassociated, but they were no longer welcomed in the diocese. So they went to Delaware, and that's when I joined them in 2004. Because still, even though they're not allowed in LA, they'd still come.
Yeah.
And so we'd go to these retreats because we're thinking, wow, Father Bing is the only one who has the nerve to preach it like it is.
Yes.
So in 2004, I joined, and it was the worst decision of my life.
Oh my gosh, Ryan. So before we enter there, do you think that there was something about Father Bing's decision to create kind of a mini order of missionaries who were praying for others and that they can move around doing that? Do you think there was something about that ability to kind of travel and move that was strategic on his part so that you guys might go undetected with what he was preaching?
Well, when my brother was in there and I was not yet in there, he would travel the world. He would go to Italy, he would go here and there, but it seemed like at that time things were still uh tamed. But I remember my brother saying that, hey, now they want me to study. So it was more formal. There was like still that formality in the church where there still has to be, you still have to go through the proper channels. And it seemed like they were doing that. And for my brother's time, it's like, hey, do you want me to go to Australia, to the diocese there, and study theology, study philosophy? But I remember my brother kind of sharing with us where he didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
But like from what I understood and what I understand now is that every time he shared those feelings of, I think I'm not meant to be a member in this community. It was, here's a ticket. You're going to Italy, or you're going to Ireland, or you're going to go to Africa, and you're going to do some missionary work there. So my brother was like, hey man, it's a free ride, free everything. This is a once in a lifetime experience. So he took it. So he traveled, and it was very easy at that time. Whereas when I joined, the traveling kind of stopped, and then my brother left when I joined, and it was just like a new chapter. Now it was more, I think when my brother left and I joined during that time, it was starting to become a super cult, the only way I can explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well explained, Ryan.
Yes.
Well explained. Okay, so what are you kind of feeling around that time that you decide to make this big commitment?
Well, I went to a retreat by Father Bing and some of his priests, and what they were saying was, God is calling you now. And what do you do? If you feel the heat, you need to strike now. If you cool down, you're going to lose that once in a lifetime chance to follow God. So you need to make your decision. You need to be swift, and you need to follow Christ now. Because if you don't follow Christ, if you don't follow God, then you're going to be a misfit for the rest of your life. And I'm 16 years old when I'm hearing these retreats. So I'm thinking, well, damn, if I'm going to follow God and this is my only chance, well, shoot, I'm going to follow. So I did. I left high school, and some people asked, well, how about your parents? Weren't they like involved? They were very involved. They were very worried. Even my brother was like, oh, like, hold on. Like, like, make sure, you're thinking about this. But the way it was presented was that once I joined, they'll allow me to do like a homeschooling to finish my junior and senior year. But if you know cults, you know that sometimes, or most of the time, what they say isn't gospel truth.
That's right. And the promises end up being false.
Yes, so they're very false promises. But I joined with this purest intention, this purest idea that this is what God wants me to do. And I went through difficulty because I didn't really want to be there. My body was like rejecting, but my mind, and the mind, how they reform your thoughts, that thought reformation is telling me, but this is what Father Bing said, and he's close to God, so you have to stay. So that's what kept me in there, and that's how I joined.
Yes. Oh, Ryan, I feel like so many others can relate to that on many levels. One, just that pure goodness and desire. And then also that moment of struggle where you're wanting to align with what you know is good, but also fascinating, of course, right? Because the body doesn't lie. And
Hmm.
so your gut was saying something else, but you can't figure out why. So you align with what you think is the best or closest movement to God.
Well, I think that's one of their first steps. This is what Father Bing started doing, what through his preaching, and the other members who were superiors in this group, was they need to make the members feel that they can no longer trust themselves. You can't, I mean, they're telling you that this is where God wants you. And if you feel that it's not meant for you, that's demonic influence. So some members do leave because they really, I mean, they were, I guess it was just clear that they couldn't hang.
Yeah.
But I pushed myself to make myself hang. And it started because I was saying how in the time of my brother, it was more missionary. When the time that I joined, it became more, uh, they try to present itself like a religious community. And it did run as a religious community. And that's just a whole different story where there's the novitiate and then you take your vows. So it's very formal in the Catholic setting, but then underneath they're doing this coercion. They're pretty much instilling fear in the members that they have to stay. Whereas it's supposed to be in the religious community, there's a thing called discernment. Discernment is where you have the freedom to choose, do I want to take my vows? Is this where God is calling me? And in the Catholic communities, what's supposed to happen is the community gives you that space where you choose. and it's not force, and they're not going to beat the hell out of you. But in this place, it's we're not forcing you, but if you leave, the devil's going to get you. So I mean, that's how they manipulated
Right.
the scenario.
And that is no joke when you actually, I mean, these are they feel like life and death decisions because they are within that belief system and context. So that really is what you're facing if you're entertaining that option. It's terrifying, terrifying. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the structure shifting at this time where you go in. So when you went in, was the structure beginning to happen where you had kind of different levels of attainment, so to speak?
Well, they already, because I think when he started in the 90s in the Philippines, it already had a bit of that religious structure of, you take your vows, there's those professions, and then it leads to perpetual profession. But the thing is that they were not yet fully recognized by the church. So there still are leaps of investigations and procedures that the church has to do for new groups before it can give it, I guess you can say, like the full stamp of approval. A
Yeah.
bishop can give them permission. Okay, I'll let you start up. I mean, I can't hold you back. But to be fully recognized by the church, there has to be that process. So at least Father Bing started off really making it as a religious community with you have your prayer life, you have like the work that you do, and that time was missionary life, but it wasn't structured well with the formation. Now, when I joined, Father Bing introduced something called the preventive system. So Father Bing was saying that, oh, back in when we started, we used the repressive system, and I didn't know what that was. I've heard stories of members who were really abused through being repressed. But he's like, now we're gonna have something called the preventive system. So what they do is there's someone watching you at all times, monitoring you, and pretty much writing down all of the violations that you do. So all the time there's someone, and it's going to be one of you from the group. You have to observe the other members. For example, if someone is falling asleep in prayer, you write it down. If someone is late, if someone, for example, like in prayer, you're supposed to be um like your hands are supposed to be like against your chest, pointing to heaven. But if your hands are down a little bit, there's someone who has to, the one who's assigned has to like poke you to make sure you're back in place. So the preventive system, they were saying it's not repressive, but we're preventing you from, example, falling into laziness, falling into lust. So at the end, since someone is jotting down all of the violations, we used to call it, Father Bing said, before this preventive system, we would call it, we would have this thing called disciplinary measures.
Hmm.
Now that I'm bringing in this preventive system, we're going to, instead of disciplinary measures, it's going to be called divine mercy. So it's like,
Oh,
so in our minds, it's okay. This is like, for example, for the violations of being late to prayer or something. Okay, now it's going to be half breakfast or no breakfast or no lunch, or you're going to be in absolute silence for 3 days, for example. It's not seen as a punishment, it's seen as a reparation, because through your sins, you have tainted your relationship with Christ. Therefore, to purify it, to cleanse it, you need to like atone, or you need to do this reparation. And that reparation is suffering. But now with divine mercy, this is the mercy of God. So it's really tricking the mind into thinking that this is good for you.
absolutely. It's the power of loaded language at work and what can take place and unfold from there. I mean, wild. I had a question for you, Ryan. Oh, I know what I was thinking. So Father Bing formalized what most cults never verbalize, which is, what was it that I was, it wasn't his structure. It wasn't the isolation. I forgot my point, Ryan. I'll probably think of it as you're talking. Sorry. I was like, oh, it was just a cool connection. So if I think of it, I'll.
That's fine. But the preventive system, he actually adopted it from another Catholic community. And that's from the school I used to go to. So I kind of had red flags because the preventive system, it's the idea of the idea of it is instead of having remedies of discipline and yelling at the children, let's prevent. Let's use so the structure was yes, let's use faith, religion, but let's also use our reason and let's use kindness. And so in that school that I went to as a child, what they would have is we would have like sometimes older students, you know, kind of like guardian angels, just what eating with us, like we're kindergartners. They'll be like the examples, so we just look up to them, and they just play with us, or they gather us to like play basketball, and it was more. I, I mean, I saw it as cool. We have this older student who's a good example, and he'd pray with us, for example, and we go on and play our games, or we get sent to class. Whereas in Father Bing's world, he says that he's using that structure, but the way it was implemented, the way we were to practice it was still repressive as hell. I mean, it was.
Oh my gosh.
But I can't allow my thoughts to go in that direction because Father Bing is, according to him, he has this like connection with the Holy Spirit. So who the hell am I to disagree with that? But the
Well,
red
right.
flags
And
are
then,
going off.
right. And then you're unholy if you have any sort of rejection of the suffering.
Yeah, and that's not what the preventive system was about in the first place. It was the way it was used was instead of yelling at people, instead of being a jerk, just be kind, and try to prevent bad things from happening at the schools. Okay, that was cool. But now he's presenting it as, we're preventing you from sinning and we're going to discipline you, but it's not discipline. It's a divine mercy. It's no longer disciplinary measure. It's a divine mercy. And he'd say, "Oh, I got this from other Catholic community, which I was a part of, kind of as I said in the school. So I'm seeing how it's not consistent. But I was only 17 at this point. I have to accept it. But the red flags are just going off like crazy."
So Father Bing formalized what most cults do and what happens in a cult, which is members end up monitoring one another. But that usually forms within a group because of something that sort of takes place naturally through some messages, but often it's not even voiced. It just begins happening because of the group dynamic of the honoring of transformation or perfection. And so it's a gift to have your brother or sister point out your indiscretions or faults or ways that you're distancing from God. And it's this guise that it's actually helpful to an individual, to the extent, of course, that somebody can literally be excommunicated, and that shunning is really for the wellness of their soul.
Well, that's what they would say. Like if, for example, if a member, we coined the term a member in crisis. When a member was in crisis, let's say like they were depressed or they wanted to go home or maybe they weren't waking up for prayers. So we'd say, oh, he's in crisis. He or she is in crisis. The rest of the community, we can't talk to them because they are under some kind of demonic influence. And so they're going to be shunned because since they're under demonic influence, under this crisis, they might infest the rest of the community. So it's giving us a purpose uh, to do the shunning instead of because the preventive system is supposed to show kindness and reason. Instead of doing that, it was more yeah, it was the total opposite. But they're telling you it's kindness and they're telling you it's reason, but
Brilliant.
it's yeah, it
Brilliant.
is.
Because when you've got those powerful words, it's the words that people then latch onto in their mind. And then you can't see the lack of kindness or the complete lack of reason.
But it really you latch on. I latched on, but it goes against the human nature because I'm right now in the timeline. I'm still in the first year, um, but there were times like okay, because the divine mercies now were like okay, no breakfast or no lunch, or you have to spend more time in prayer. It wasn't there weren't any corporal punishments yet, because I think we're so young. I think they didn't want to do it right away. I think they wanted to like build us up.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it really got me. It really got me stuck. I really felt that this has the purpose. Oh yeah, I was gonna go with the nature. So there are times when I have no meal, or now I'm in silence. So although it's not like the corporal punishments of like beatings, which later happens, this is more like breaking down my food and breaking down my human connection. So sometimes I would get pissed off and I'll say something to someone, like to a superior, like, "Hey, this is messed up."
Yeah.
But the way it's created, it's like a hamster wheel. It's like, okay, now I've made another violation. Now I have this guilt because I spoke back. And another thing that Father Bing would say in some of his talks was that if you commit violations and you know that you've like committed these infractions or violations, like God sees it, and since like suffering is the way to cleanse it, you should take that dose of humility, go to the superior, say your sins, and I'm not talking about the sacrament of confession. I mean just go to him and take your punishments. So the way it was constructed was not only are you being monitored at all times, but also your thoughts have been reformed to make you think that you have to seek out suffering because that's the only way to become holy and to become perfect through suffering.
So perfectly twisted. Wow. Okay, so this is kind of year one. Tell us a little bit into the progression of what you start to notice and kind of what you're thinking at that time. Interesting also, Ryan, that even in the first year, and as some of these things are going on, and there's the food deprivation and some other kind of punishments, that you do have the wherewithal to think something's off here,
But I did, but it's
but you're trapped.
I'm I wasn't trapped at that time mentally. I was thinking I am in the place where God loves me. This isn't a trap. This is a holy embrace. So they'd use, like you said, loaded language to make you accept it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I was trapped. I felt that I felt like I was free because I'm free
Yes.
to love God, and my only way to love Him is through suffering. So what happened during that year one before we move on was because I mentioned how before it was presented to my parents, to my family, that I am going to be continuing my homeschooling for high school. And
Yeah.
I've always gone to high school, and then I just leave to join them.
Yeah.
So what happened was when we started the homeschooling, a lot of the subjects Father Bing and the sisters of the community that he made, they were like, no, he can't study this, he can't read this. And I remember one of them was a William Shakespeare, a Merchant of Venice.
Yes.
And I said, you can't read that. And I was like, really? What's wrong with this one? It's infested, it's hexed by demons. So it's like, well, oh shit, it's like, but I'm accepting it because
Yes.
I see Father Bing as a holy guy, although I have red flags already, but I've I buried those red flags. And
Yes.
it's like, okay, so I can't study. Well, then Father Bing would say, so many people have degrees. They have diplomas, they become doctors, and where are they now? They're in hell. So there's no point of people getting degrees. Better just follow Christ. So it's okay. So in my mind, high school, it doesn't matter. The end of the world is going to come anyways. So why waste my time reading Shakespeare? Why waste my time reading, whatever the subjects were?
Yeah.
So they canceled my homeschooling for high school. I didn't finish high school. And at the end of that first year, starting the second year, that's where I went to the Philippines. And that's where it became full on cult.
Wow. What was your family thinking at this point?
Well, before I left to the Philippines, because Father Bing has all these retreats, and there was a place in Alabama where he was allowed to go. So I went because it was my last time, my last hurrah, I guess you could say, in America. And before my parents came, my superior told me, you have to avoid talking to your parents. If they're going to be talking to you, don't make it obvious, but try your best to avoid them, but don't make it obvious. So they came and they went to the retreat, and they told me later, like they didn't care about the retreat. The Father Bing says the same goofy stuff. They didn't care about it. They just went to see me,
Yeah.
and they asked. Well, my parents told me, what the hell is your problem that during that thing? This
Yeah.
is later. I was like, why? Like, what are you talking about? Oh, because like when we saw you, you were like playing busy, like you're being a busybody, and oh, I'm very busy, and like they talked to me. I talked to them for a few minutes, but I I was obeying my superior, and it's funny. Just right now, just talking to you right now about it, I remember and my brother had just left the community a few months before.
Yeah.
And my mother, she did get a chance to talk to me because I mean, there's not that many places you can go and hide.
Right.
So she did get a chance to talk to me, and she told me that my brother had actually written a letter to Father Bing, kind of saying like, kind of pointing out how Father Bing didn't have genuine concern for the Hispanic people or the poor people, a genuine concern.
Yeah.
And in my mind, my I don't know, my spidey senses or something, they were going off because here someone is presenting to me real reason, and but I'm stuck with, oh, I have to obey. My mom coming to me and sharing this information with me, that's the devil. And I need to pray more for my brother. I need to pray more for my parents. They didn't know. And I think even my brother didn't know because how extreme it was.
Yeah.
Because in his case, he people would say he's very good looking. I heard people say that he's mesmerizing. And that's why I believe, and I think even he believes, he would be sent out to all these missions because they would use his face as like the poster child.
Yeah.
And so he didn't receive the same treatment, but he did see that Father Bing didn't have that true concern for the poor, which he says he does. So my mom telling me this affected me, where I wanted to get away, because and now in my mind at that time I'm thinking, I'm not obeying my superior. He told me I have to avoid my parents, and now this is my punishment. No, I see how possessed, how infested by demons. So that was my last time with them, and then I go to the Philippines, and things there are just totally. It became a it. I did become trapped in the Philippines. It really did become a prison, and it was just a. There were some good experiences. I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah,
but
there usually
but
are.
the majority were. I shouldn't have been there.
Yeah. Oh, Ryan, I also just reflect again on your age and how young you are when all of this is happening. And this, yeah, it's a very powerful experience in that moment between you and your mother, and kind of where your mind is at and needing to kind of get away. I really understand that feeling and relate to it in my own experience with my family, of remembering kind of wanting to kind of run away, wanting to get off the phone, wanting to get out of those conversations, because I couldn't, it created such dissonance inside of me of what I was doing versus actually being able to feel that they had genuine concerns and really loved me. And it was very hard to reconcile. But, oh, they just don't understand what I'm doing,
Mhm.
all of that.
But
So,
it also, it kind of like doubled down, because Father Bing would say that if someone, and this is also a way that they got me to really be fully immersed, because Father Bing would say, and the other superiors, if you leave your vocation, you're going to be a misfit, and your family is going to be cursed to the eighth generation.
oh,
But Ryan, it's like the message is, you're still here. Even though your brother has left, you are the last hope for your family.
yes.
So that gave me even more drive. All right, I need to do more. I need to seek more suffering. I need to seek more pain, because it's the idea is, the more you suffer, the more pain you get, the more graces you're going to give to your family. And so it was like a hostage situation. Either they're going to be kept hostage by the devil, or I do something about it by offering myself as a victim to save them.
Oh,
So
Ryan.
pure intentions.
And the way that they take the goodness in an individual and twist it back on you to trap you, or move forward with their agenda.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what your experience was there, or any kind of significant experiences?
Well, so much went on, but it was in our first community that I stayed in. It was in the fields, like in the rice fields. We were allowed there by the bishop. Um, so we're in these rice fields. It kind of reminds me of like movies when you see like about Vietnam.
Yeah.
You're like in like these pretty much jungles, rice fields, and this is now my novitiate. So now I'm starting my novitiate, and now it's okay. Now it's going to be even more disciplined. So now the monitor, or we call them the assistant, the one who's supposed to like watch you at all times. He has a stick, and they'll be poking you for everything, and monitoring everything. They monitor like how long are your fingernails, are you shaved, just everything, your sleep.
Yeah.
It's all it was everything was just under a microscope. And I'm trying to think of like where to start, because there's so much happened. But just to I guess boil it down, that bishop left and went somewhere else, and now a new bishop came, and this new bishop wants to know, like, who the hell is this community? Father Bing, like, he's heard about Father Bing, and Father Bing does have, um he does have a problem of getting kicked out in other areas. So this bishop, from what I'm aware of, was kind of questioning the practices. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened, but I'm assuming that that bishop no longer allowed Father Bing and the members to be there. But we're like 60 members.
Wow.
There's a bunch of us living in this one little house. So it's like 60 of us, 50 or 60 of us, and in the middle of the night, they wake us up, we get on a bus, and we go to another location. So now we're in another location, but our school is back at that original place. So we have to come back. It was just such a mind screwing, just going back and forth. But the way they did it when they'd wake us up at night was like the persecution is happening. The church is persecuting us. So it really even reinforced that us versus them. And it's like, why are they attack? Why is the bishop attacking us? It's he's infested by the devil, of course. Like duh. And the other bishop, I'm not sure how much that other bishop knew, but I mean, he didn't question enough. So
Wow.
I'm grateful that one bishop was like, "Hey, what the hell's going on?"
Yeah.
But now what happens is it allows the community to be like, "Okay, let's put up our defenses." So what we would do if we had to go back to that diocese, instead of dressing in our uniforms, our religious habits, I would dress up like a college student or someone dress up in jeans, and they will say, this is like the end times, so we have to be ready, so we have to mix in.
Wow.
And it gives that like CIA kind of, or like you're like undercover, you're saving souls, and the enemy, like the communists, the Russians, are everyone else who's not part of the group.
Yeah. Wow. So where were you living then?
I was living I in from the original house was, and these are long Filipino words. It was in uh I think it's called Kita Kita Nueve Ecija. So we're in that area, and now the new bishop kicks us out. So now we go to Santa Cruz Laguna, where we are welcomed, but we're going back and forth, and I'm bothered because Father Bing, I mean, for Catholics and you're in the novitiate, you take vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. But since he's taken this cult approach, the way obedience is seen is that you have to obey everything to the letter. There has to be punctuality. Also, if a superior gives you an obedience, you can't talk back. You can't even show emotions. If you show emotions, that's a sin, or you've lost graces from God. So it's and then in one of our handbooks, it says there we are not treating you like robots, more like children of God. But that's, I mean, come on. Like now that I can think, it's like, dude, like, come on, you're treating us like robots where we can't even show emotions.
Wow.
So going back to Laguna and going back to Nueva Ecija, that whole back and forth kind of bothered me because on one part, Father Bing is telling us we're a Catholic community. You have to obey what we say because you've taken your vows, or we're about to take our vows. But then we're not obeying the bishop. And the way Father Bing says it is, no, even if you don't like the obedience, you obey it humbly and punctually and to the letter. Don't complain. And I'm kind of thinking, well, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, aren't we disobeying? Aren't we? So it was just, my mind was just going out of control, kind of. I mean, I didn't lose my sanity, but all these question marks are just flying all over. But then our schedule was just becoming even more busier, busy, 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 and then we have like bullshit classes where, I mean, they just talk this. It was just a complete waste of time. But in America, from what I'm aware of, they would take pictures of us living in poor places, and to our parents at the retreats, or to at the retreats here in America, Father Bing would show these pictures, like because they would always be doing construction. So they'd show us like a half-built house. It's like dilapidated, falling apart. And I was like, we need more money to fund for these things. And my parents asked me after I left, when I came back home, they're like, so like how did those like construction sites go? I never finished. Like, what do you mean I never finished? Like Father Bing would always show these pictures. And yeah, a lot of money did go into it, but like where the hell did the rest of it go? And like we had shit food. We had like the worst clothing. Like if your shoes broke, well, good luck. You're gonna have to walk barefoot for a while, or tough luck. So all that, so that for me is exploitation. They were exploiting us. They were presenting to the families that, hey, we need to fund them. But that money didn't come to us.
We so hope that you enjoyed this episode. These podcasts were edited by Nathan Lemke. If you'd like to work with him, please reach out to me and I will put him in touch with you. And please stay tuned for part of Leaving the Cult, the season 2 song written by Jaya Suri. And for all things related to Jaya, her music, ways that you can support her, check out the show notes.